Grant said in his 1985 book, Bringing in the Sheaves, quote, "Now that the war on poverty is entering its third decade, its record of abysmal failure is becoming increasingly clear. The substitution of officers of the state of humanitarian good works for Christian charity has been a disaster almost without precedent," end quote. Now that we are in 2016 and entering the sixth decade of that war on poverty, has the state done anything that actually has worked, or are there other and better ways to combat the war on poverty? Poverty affects all of us, as the poor will always be with us. Our calling as Christians is to know how to help our fellow man in a way that is neither demeaning nor addictive and treats the disease rather than just the symptoms. First of all, though, there are some good examples of the welfare state helping people. During the early 1930s, FDR created innumerable jobs for the unemployed during the Depression, and many presidents did so before him as well. That Depression ended with World War II, and yet the welfare state continued to expand. There is a certain place for the welfare state in extenuating circumstances such as the Depression. However, after the World War and even in our current circumstances, there is no place for the welfare system. Such misuse of the welfare system is established by a quote from Senator Jeff Sessions in a 2013 Senate Budget Committee. Quote, "Welfare is now the single largest item in the federal budget. It is larger than Medicare, larger than defense, and larger than Social Security." Welfare, as I said, and federally funded aid are justified under conditions such as the Depression. However, we are not under those conditions anymore. The rise of the welfare state has continued to grow and has had less and less results. Another quote from Senator Jeff Sessions. Quote, since President Johnson's Great Society, the federal government has spent over $15 trillion on the war on poverty, yet the poverty rate has remained largely unchanged, end quote. The consequences of such a society are as follows. Robert Sirico said, "Your entrepreneurial skills are dulled and your culture becomes deadened. Your personhood is disrespected." And going even farther back to James Madison, one of our founding fathers, he said, quote, "If Congress can employ money indefinitely to the general welfare and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, it would subvert the very foundations and transmute the very nature of limited government." Like I said, though, there are other approaches, and I would contend better approaches to the war on poverty. In a 2010 Forbes article by Yaron Brook and Don Watkins entitled "America Before the Entitlement," quote, "Only when all other options were exhausted would people turn to formal private charities. By the mid-19th century, groups aiming to help widows, orphans, and other worthy poor were launched into every major city in America. There were some government welfare programs, but they were minuscule compared to private efforts," end quote. The authors of this article continue and go on to explain how even in some cities like New York and Chicago, there were innumerable organizations to take care of people before they even had to go on the dole, as it was said back in the day. Father Sirica again says, "What helps the poor is access to work, and welfare does no such thing. It keeps them addicted to being given the hypothetical fish by the government." Ronald Reagan knew that big government was bad government. He visited a Latter-day Saints Deseret organization and said this, quote, "This is one of the great examples in America today of what we've been talking about what people could do for themselves if they hadn't been dragooned into believing that the government was the only answer." My conclusions for today is that the state and federal aid only serves to addict people to public handouts. If we only have hope for renewed cities and restored bodies in this life, we are of all people most to be pitied. This is a quote from What is the Mission of the Church, which I would consider to be under the categories of private organizations. These private organizations are much better at preparing people to go back into the workforce because they put more attention into the individual and psychological lives of the people and put them back into the workforce. If we turn back to private as opposed to federal solutions, there will be less people on the streets, more jobs, greater communities, and more dignity.